Chicago that night was a furnace of injustice. The blaring sirens of police cars tore through the darkness, and beneath the flickering streetlights, a hunt began. It was not for a dangerous criminal, but for a young, talented attorney, Emily, who had just stepped out of a late-night meeting. Officer Kane, a cop with bloodstained hands, stopped her car, offering no explanation. His rough hand gripped Emily's wrist, slamming her face against the cold hood of the car. His words, venomous and contemptuous, shredded the peace of the night. In that moment, Emily felt utter helplessness and the deepest shame. She knew this wasn't just an ordinary encounter. It was an uneven battle. But Officer Kane had made a fatal mistake. He had no idea that the woman he had just humiliated would soon hold the highest power in her hands. She would be the one to decide his fate in a courtroom that would shake the entire city. A blood revenge, a terrifying face-off, and a priceless lesson about the cost of arrogance and cruelty were about to unfold. Would Emily dare to cross the line of justice to avenge all she had endured? And could Officer Kane escape the ruthless punishment that awaited him? If you want to know what happens next, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any other captivating videos on our channel. That night, Chicago wasn't just a city, it was the furnace of injustice. The streets, shrouded in dense darkness, reflected the flashing neon lights, creating an eerie, haunting atmosphere. The sound of police sirens echoed, tearing through the stillness of the night, signaling an unrestful evening. Officer Kane, with eyes as cold as ice and a contemptuous smile hidden beneath his neatly trimmed mustache, was not just a cop. He was the embodiment of abusive power. His police uniform wasn't a symbol of justice. It was a cloak that concealed his brutal actions. Within the police department, Kane was notorious for his nickname, Bloodstained Hands. Stories of his excessive use of force, of victims beaten mercilessly, had become nightmares for many. Whispers about his racist behavior spread, but no one dared to speak out. Tonight, Kane continued to operate in his usual fashion. He patrolled the desolate streets, searching for easy prey. His cold gaze swept over each car, each pedestrian, like a predator hunting in the shadows. When Emily drove home after a late meeting, Kane had been watching her from afar. He recognized her car, a sleek black sedan, and guessed she was a successful woman. As Emily stopped at a red light in a quiet area, Kane activated his sirens and pulled her over. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated her face, creating an unsettling feeling. License and registration, Kane barked, his tone arrogant. He didn't greet her or introduce himself. He simply gave an order. Although Emily felt uneasy, she tried to stay calm. She handed her documents to Kane, hoping he would quickly check them and let her go. But Kane wasn't in any hurry. He intentionally dragged out the process, flipping through each document as though searching for a mistake. "Do you know you just broke a traffic law?" Kane asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I don't think so," Emily replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Oh, really?" Kane scoffed. "I saw you run the red light." "No, I didn't run the red light," Emily countered. "I stopped when it turned red." "You dare argue with me?" Kane growled. "Here, I make the rules." As Emily attempted to explain, Kane suddenly grabbed her wrist, yanked her out of the car, and slammed her face into the cold hood. "Shut up," he shouted. "Here, I am the law." This act wasn't just an abuse of power. It was an insult, a harsh reminder of Emily's powerlessness before his might. The physical pain and the mental anguish intertwined, creating a feeling of utter humiliation. After Kane's bloodstained hands finally released her, Emily sat motionless in her car, her body shaking violently, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The car, once a place of comfort, had now transformed into a suffocating, claustrophobic prison. The quiet was overwhelming. The only sound in the oppressive silence was the staccato rhythm of her labored breathing, broken only by the sound of her choking sobs that echoed through the confined space. Each sob felt like a dagger stabbing at her already shattered sense of self. The pain coursed through her, a raw, undiluted force that threatened to consume everything. She felt as though she had been stripped of all dignity, every ounce of strength ripped away, leaving her vulnerable and exposed. It was as if a part of her soul had been crushed beneath Kane's boot, a part of herself that would never be whole again. The crushing weight of his cruelty lingered on her skin, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that it would be with her forever. Shame, helplessness, and rage surged within her like a violent storm, each emotion battling for control. Her tears, hot and relentless, rolled down her cheeks, smearing the world outside into a distorted blur. The flickering streetlights outside her window seemed to spin, twisted and hazy, like a nightmare that wouldn't let go. The memories came flooding back, each one more painful than the last. She thought of Mrs. Rosa, her gentle neighbor, whose home had been invaded by the police for no other reason than living in a problematic neighborhood. The image of Rosa's terrified face as the officers rifled through her belongings, demanding answers to questions no one should have to ask, replayed in her mind. Then there was Jamal, her childhood friend, whose innocent face had been tarnished by the violent hands of law enforcement simply because of the color of his skin. The sound of his cries as the police manhandled him, forcing him into a car, was a memory that haunted her dreams. These memories cut into her heart like sharp knives, each one slicing deeper than the last. She was no longer just Emily, a woman who had been humiliated. She was a witness to the endless cycle of injustice that seemed to plague those with no voice, those with no power. She felt not only insulted but betrayed, abandoned by those who were supposed to protect and serve. The feeling of being hunted, of being prey to a predator so powerful and so merciless, consumed her. "I can't let this go," Emily whispered hoarsely to herself. The words barely escaped her trembling lips. They were thick with emotion, her voice choked with the weight of everything she had just experienced. But beneath the sorrow and fear, there was a growing resolve, a quiet determination. "I have to do something. I can't let him walk free." The words felt like a lifeline, pulling her out of the suffocating darkness that threatened to drown her. She knew what would happen if she stayed silent, if she accepted this, allowed herself to be another victim in a world that had grown so numb to injustice. Cain's bloodstained hands would continue their work. He would keep spreading fear, keep committing atrocities, and the cycle would never end. She couldn't be complicit in that. She would not allow it. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone. The cold screen felt foreign beneath her fingertips, but she knew what she had to do. She documented everything. The words Cain had said, the way he had touched her, the twisted look in his eyes as he humiliated her. She snapped photos of the bruises on her wrist, the raw marks of abuse that would tell a story she couldn't yet put into words. She knew that these pieces of evidence might not be enough to bring him to justice, but it was a start. She would not give up. She would seek help. She would reach out to those who could fight with her, to civil rights organizations, to anyone who would stand with her against this overwhelming tide of corruption. But just as she was about to finish recording the details of the attack, a sudden shift in the air caught her attention. She glanced in the rearview mirror. Her heart stopped when she saw it. A black car parked just a short distance away, the headlights off, no license plate visible. It sat there like a shadow in the night, watching her. Her spine went cold. Was this car connected to Cain? Was he watching her? Was he following her? Her breath caught in her throat, the familiar feeling of dread creeping up her spine. She quickly turned away, focusing on her phone, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. But she couldn't. Her hands trembled even more now. The shadows seemed to close in around her. A sudden ping from her phone made her jump. It was an anonymous message. "Be careful. You're playing with fire." Her fingers trembled as she read the words, a cold shiver running through her entire body. The message sent a wave of fear crashing over her, but it didn't break her. No, instead, it sparked something inside of her. This was bigger than just one man. She was up against something dangerous, something insidious. But this only fueled her resolve. She couldn't back down now. Emily needed to talk to someone, to get guidance, to strategize. She called her friend, a lawyer who had always been a source of support. But as she heard the phone ring, there was something else, another sound, a faint noise like breathing coming from the other end of the line. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The rustling sound made her blood run cold. Someone was listening to her conversation. Quickly, she ended the call, panic seizing her. She looked around the darkened street, her pulse racing. She was being watched, followed, threatened. She felt like a pawn in a game far bigger than herself. But no matter how frightened she was, she knew she couldn't stop now. This was no longer just about her. This was about the community, about every person who had been oppressed, silenced, and discarded. She couldn't let Cain's bloodstained hands keep claiming victims. She couldn't let this go. She had to stand up, fight for justice, for truth. She couldn't back down, not for herself, not for anyone. This was just the beginning. The fight for justice had only just begun. A few days after that horrific night, Emily was still drowning in a sea of unease and anger. The trauma of what had happened to her was consuming, but she couldn't afford to ignore it. She had been meticulously gathering evidence, documenting every detail of the incident, and reaching out to her lawyer friends for guidance. Every night when she closed her eyes, The image of Cain's blood-stained hands haunted her, chasing her in her thoughts, a constant reminder of the humiliation and violence she had endured. Her mind was a war zone, conflicting emotions swirling in her chest. She felt violated, furious, but also trapped by the weight of the world. She had to do something more than just suffer in silence. She knew she couldn't allow Cain's actions to be dismissed, but she also knew that any move she made would be risky. In the midst of this chaos, her phone rang, pulling her out of the dark thoughts that had gripped her. The caller's voice, formal and authoritative, came through clearly on the other end. "Judge Emily Carter," the voice said, a tone of respect in every word. "We are pleased to inform you that by the mayor's decision, you have been appointed as the temporary judge for the community court." Emily was taken aback, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't expected such a call, especially not now, when her emotions were raw, when she was so far from feeling the strength required for such a role. "What? Me? A judge?" she whispered to herself, almost in disbelief. "Temporary judge?" she stammered, still trying to process the words. "Yes, Judge Carter," the voice confirmed. "This is a great honor. We believe you will perform your duties admirably." A jolt of electricity ran down Emily's spine. The shock of the news hit her like a physical blow. She couldn't fathom why she had been chosen for this position. She had always admired judges, respected them from afar, but to be in their shoes, to hold such immense responsibility, it was more than overwhelming. But beneath the shock, something else began to stir inside her, a growing sense of purpose. This was her chance, a chance to take control, a chance to right the wrong she had experienced, to bring true justice to a broken system. But with that realization came an equally heavy burden. Being a judge wasn't just about power. It was about responsibility, the weight of the law, the balance between right and wrong. She wasn't just handed the gavel. She was entrusted with lives, with the very foundation of justice itself. And if she wasn't careful, the corruption, the cruelty that had tainted her experience, might be perpetuated by someone like her. She couldn't let that happen. On her first day at the courthouse, Emily's nerves were palpable. She donned the judge's robe for the first time, its fabric heavy on her shoulders. As she stepped into the courtroom, every step felt like a leap. She walked to the bench with the gaze of everyone upon her. The reality of her new role settled in. She took her seat in the judge's chair, the position of authority she had once only dreamed of, now her own. But just as the overwhelming responsibilities were about to consume her thoughts, someone, caught her eye. Standing before the defendant's stand was a man she would never forget, Officer Cain, the man who had assaulted her, humiliated her, and shattered her sense of security. Time seemed to freeze as their gazes met. Emily's heart skipped a beat, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. Cain stood there, just as arrogant and composed as he had been the night he had violated her. He didn't recognize the storm brewing inside her, didn't know that the woman he had tormented was now the one who held his fate in her hands. He merely stood, expecting another trial, another day where he could avoid punishment for his crimes. "This is my chance," Emily thought, her thoughts racing. The voice of her mentor, Judge Vance, echoed in her mind, reminding her of the importance of the law, the need for fairness. But there was also a voice, her voice, that roared louder and fiercer than anything she had ever heard. "I won't let this go. I will use my power to get justice." She knew this would be an uneven fight. Cain had power, he had connections, protection from his colleagues in the force. His badge was his shield, his arrogance his sword. He had lived a life above the law, free from consequences, hiding behind his uniform. But Emily was different. She was not just a woman angry with him. She was the law now. And she had something Cain couldn't buy: resolve. She had the strength of the community behind her. Her pain, her anger, it all became fuel for a mission greater than herself. Cain may have been untouchable in the past, but not now. She wouldn't let Cain's bloodstained hands escape the justice he had long avoided. This was her chance, her moment to right the wrongs. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every single person he had wronged. The victims who had never been heard, the ones too afraid to speak out, the broken lives left in the wake of his cruelty. The truth would come to light, and Emily would be the one to make sure it did. No matter how difficult the journey, no matter the cost, she would bring him to justice. Whether Cain knew it or not, his reign of terror was over. Sitting in the judge's chair, Emily felt the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. It wasn't just a courtroom. This was the battlefield where her soul was on the line. The air in the room was thick with tension, and every breath she took felt heavy with the decisions she had to make. Two forces battled within her, each one demanding her attention with unrelenting urgency. One force was her anger. It burned hotter than any fire she had ever felt before. The rage over what Officer Kane had done to her, the humiliation, the brutality, all of it surged through her like an uncontrollable wildfire. She wanted him to pay. She wanted him to feel the same powerlessness and shame she had been forced to endure that night. The very thought of him sitting there as if nothing had happened made her blood boil. Every fiber of her being screamed to make him pay for his cruelty. The other force was her sense of duty as a judge. It was the cold, rational voice in her head, reminding her of the immense responsibility that came with the gavel. Justice wasn't about personal vendettas. It wasn't about revenge. It was about fairness. It was about ensuring that truth prevailed, no matter how painful it might be. This voice urged her to rise above her emotions, to look at the facts, to act impartially. But in this moment, the facts seemed so clear. Kane had wronged her, and there was no denying it. The inner battle raged on, each force pulling her in a different direction. She knew she had to make a choice. If she allowed her anger to drive her, she would become just like Kane, someone who used power for personal gain, someone who acted out of hatred and revenge. But if she let go of her anger, she would risk letting him go free, letting his actions go unpunished, and that would be just as wrong. She was trapped in a no-win situation, the very essence of justice dangling in front of her, just out of reach. Her mind flashed back to the brutal night when Kane had assaulted her, the cold grip of his hand, the cruel words that echoed in her ears, the searing humiliation as she was shoved against the hood of her car. She could still feel the sting of his touch, the weight of his power. He had crossed a line, not just with her, but with everything she stood for. Every part of her wanted to destroy him, to make him feel the same helplessness she had. But then the voice of Judge Vance, her respected mentor, echoed in her mind. Justice isn't revenge, Emily, he had told her countless times. Justice is restoration. It's about finding the truth, no matter how difficult it is, and delivering a verdict that upholds fairness, not personal desires. She closed her eyes, remembering his wise words. She could almost see his face, his calm, steady demeanor as he had guided her throughout her career. He had always preached that a judge's role was to be the embodiment of fairness, to ensure that the law was applied without bias. It wasn't about what was fair for her. It was about what was fair for everyone. She had been taught to see beyond personal grievances and to focus on the greater good. But now, sitting in the very seat of power, in front of the man who had stripped away her dignity, Emily wondered, could she truly separate her own pain from the pursuit of justice? Could she find the strength to uphold the law even when it felt like the law was failing her? Her eyes drifted toward Kane, who sat in the defendant's stand, his expression as cold and detached as ever. He had no idea what she was going through, no idea how much this moment meant to her. He was a man who had spent his life abusing his position, using his badge as a shield to justify his actions. And now he sat there as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't destroyed her life in an instant. She could feel the anger building inside her again, the desire to strike him down with the power she now held. She wanted to stand up, point her finger at him, and accuse him of everything he had done to her. She wanted to shout at him, to tell him that he would not get away with it. She wanted him to feel the weight of her fury, the years of suffering that she had carried with her in silence. But then, just as quickly, she remembered her duty. She wasn't just Emily the victim anymore. She was Judge Emily Carter. And a judge didn't let their emotions dictate their decisions. A judge made decisions based on the law, based on the truth, not personal pain. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had to do this. She had to be stronger than her anger. She had to honor the trust that had been placed in her, the responsibility that came with her title. As much as it hurt, she knew that seeking revenge would only make her like him. She opened her eyes, locking them onto Kane's. His expression remained unchanged, as if he hadn't a care in the world. But Emily knew something he didn't. She held the power now. She held the key to his fate, and she would not allow him to escape what was coming to him, not with his arrogance, not with his indifference. The trial begins. Emily's voice rang out, firm and commanding. Her words reverberated in the courtroom, cutting through the tension like a sharp blade. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to give in to her emotions. She simply needed to be the judge she had trained to be, the judge who sought the truth and upheld justice, no matter the cost. This was her moment. This was the line of justice, and she had crossed it. She had chosen to stand for what was right, not what was easy. Cain would face the consequences of his actions, but not at her hands. It would be the law that decided his fate, and she would be the one to make sure the law was applied fairly, no matter how much it hurt. After making the decision to uphold fairness and objectivity, Emily walked into the courtroom with a heavy heart. The weight of what was at stake pressed down on her, each step forward feeling like a battle of its own. She had already faced the brutal assault. Now she had to face him again. Officer Cain, the man who had humiliated her, violated her trust, and shattered everything she had once believed in. She knew this would be an unequal battle. He had power, he had allies, and the law had often turned a blind eye to his transgressions. But Emily's resolve was firm. This time, the scales of justice would tip in the right direction. The trial had captured the attention of the entire city. The courtroom was packed with media reporters and people eager to witness the confrontation that everyone had been waiting for. The very thought of standing face-to-face with Cain in such a public, high-stakes arena made Emily's pulse race, but she couldn't afford to let fear rule her. This was more than just her fight. It was a fight for every person Cain had hurt, for every voice that had been silenced by his authority. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable, thick enough to cut through. Cain, seated in the defendant's chair, exuded arrogance. He had no remorse, no hint of fear in his eyes. His gaze locked onto Emily's with an unspoken challenge, daring her to make a move, daring her to do anything that might break the thin thread of power he held over her. His eyes, dark and cold, seemed to say, "You won't dare to do anything to me. I am untouchable." Emily took a deep breath as she sat in the judge's chair. She fought to keep her composure. Her hands rested on the gavel, but she knew it was her mind, not the gavel, that would be her greatest weapon. Every word, every motion, had to be precise, had to be the embodiment of justice. One small mistake, one moment of weakness, and Cain and his allies could exploit her. She couldn't let that happen. Prosecutor Davis took the floor, presenting damning evidence against Cain. The video footage was a raw, unforgiving witness to the abuse of power. It clearly showed Cain assaulting Emily, violently dragging her from her car, and humiliating her without any provocation, without cause. The video spoke louder than words ever could. But it wasn't just the video. Witnesses came forward to confirm the pattern of abuse. They described Cain's repeated violations of authority, his blatant racism, and his history of misconduct. Each new testimony chipped away at the walls of Cain's arrogance. Then Mr. Hayes, a frail, elderly black man, was called to the stand. His voice shook with emotion, but every word he spoke held the weight of years of suffering, years of being powerless in the face of injustice. He had been one of Cain's victims, one of many who had experienced the terror of a man who used his badge to terrorize and oppress. "I want justice," Mr. Hayes said, his voice rising above the courtroom silence. "I want him to pay. He's taken too much from me, too many of us. I can't let him continue his reign of terror." His words sent a wave of shock through the courtroom. The silence was heavy, suffocating. The weight of his testimony hung in the air like a storm ready to break. Emily could feel the anger of the people in the room. She felt it in her bones. But there was something else, something far more powerful. She felt the hope of those who were waiting for someone to stand up for them, to hold Cain accountable. This was bigger than her. It was about what Cain represented. He wasn't just a man on trial. He was a symbol of all the abuses of power that had gone unchecked for so long. She turned her gaze back to Cain, whose defiant expression never faltered. He remained unmoved by the testimony, by the truth that was being laid out before him. His face was the same as the night he had assaulted her, arrogant, cold, and unrepentant. He seemed to think that the law couldn't touch him, that his badge and power protected him from any consequences. Emily's blood boiled at the sight of him. She wanted to shout at him, to demand he acknowledge the pain he had caused, the lives he had ruined. "Don't you feel any shame?" She wanted to scream. "You've caused so much pain to others." But she held herself back. She knew the moment she allowed her anger to control her, she would no longer be a judge. She would just be another person driven by vengeance, seeking retribution instead of justice. That wasn't the path she had chosen. The law was not her tool for personal revenge. It was a means of restoring balance, of making right what had been wronged. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. The anger still burned inside her, but she buried it deep, choosing instead to focus on the law, on what was right. She looked directly at Cain, her voice ringing out clear and commanding in the tense courtroom. "Does the defendant have any testimony to offer?" she asked, her tone resolute, unwavering. The room held its breath. Kane remained silent. Emily's mind was clear as she spoke the words. She remembered Judge Vance's teachings, his gentle reminders that justice isn't revenge, Emily. Justice is restoration. She held fast to those words now, even as the fury inside her threatened to break free. This wasn't about her. It never had been. This was about exposing the truth and ensuring that Kane, and all those like him, would be held accountable for their actions. The truth would come to light, no matter how dark the fight had to get. She was no longer just Emily the victim. She was Judge Emily Carter, the symbol of justice, and she would see this through. She would not allow Kane to escape the consequences of his crimes. The time for reckoning had come. After hearing Mr. Hayes's testimony, Emily turned her gaze toward Kane. The room had been quiet for a moment, but the air in the courtroom was thick with tension. She straightened in her chair, gathering every ounce of her strength. "Does the defendant wish to cross-examine the witness?" she asked, her voice cutting through the thick silence, unwavering and commanding, echoing through the room. Kane didn't flinch. His arrogance was palpable. He shook his head, his lips curling into a dismissive sneer. "I have nothing to ask," he said, with a voice dripping in condescension. The words were meant to undermine, to provoke, but they only further exposed his weakness. "Then we will proceed with the prosecutor's presentation," Emily replied coldly, her words like ice cutting through his bravado. There was no room for his games now. Prosecutor Davis stepped forward, presenting even more damning evidence. The case against Kane was starting to look like an avalanche, each piece of evidence piling on top of the last, threatening to bury him in his own lies. He presented more testimony from witnesses, victims who had suffered at Kane's hands, and detailed physical evidence. Each revelation painted a clearer, uglier portrait of the defendant. Kane had abused his power repeatedly, his actions an open violation of the oath he had taken. Worse still, he had engaged in systematic racism, using his position to terrorize and belittle those he considered beneath him. The prosecutor made it clear, Officer Kane was not just a rogue cop, he was a criminal hiding behind the badge. Next, Inspector Diaz took the stand. She was composed, her voice steady but firm as she laid out the full scope of Kane's misconduct. She detailed how Kane had violated police regulations, his actions a repeated pattern of abuse and disregard for the law. She revealed his history of racial discrimination, showing that this wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of a larger, far more dangerous pattern of behavior. "Your Honor, we have evidence proving that Officer Kane has repeatedly abused his power and engaged in racist behavior," Inspector Diaz said, her words reverberating with authority. "We believe that Officer Kane is a danger to society." Her statement sent a chill through the courtroom. The weight of her words settled heavily on Kane's shoulders. He had no way to deny the evidence. His past had caught up with him, and there was nowhere left to hide. For the first time, Kane shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face betraying a crack in the facade of confidence he had worn so well for years. He glanced around the room, his eyes desperately searching for someone, anyone, to offer him a lifeline. But there was no escape. No one came to his defense. His colleagues avoided his gaze, too ashamed to support the man who had spent years using his power to abuse others. Emily's gaze hardened as she turned back to Kane. This was the moment. This was when his lies would unravel. She leaned forward, her voice now sharp as she pressed him with questions. "Officer Kane," she began, each word deliberate, "can you explain your abuse of power, your actions toward innocent civilians? Can you justify the behavior described by these witnesses?" Kane, caught in the corner, tried to deny it. He stammered and deflected, but his words were hollow. Each attempt to explain away his actions met with contradictions, gaps, and blatant fabrications. Every lie he told only deepened the hole he was digging for himself. Emily's questions were methodical, relentless. With each response from Kane, she pushed him further into a corner, exposing the full extent of his cruelty. She didn't need to shout. His own lies, his own arrogance, spoke louder than any accusation could. The truth was there, plain for all to see. Kane was a man who had abused his position to manipulate, intimidate, and harm. His facade was crumbling, piece by piece. The truth came out in sharp, undeniable bursts. Kane could no longer avoid the reality of his actions. The more he tried to deflect, the more his behavior was laid bare. There was no denying it anymore. The weight of his actions, the depth of his cruelty, was now laid out in full view of the world. The people in the courtroom were seething with anger. Their faces were tight with disgust, but they were also filled with a sense of admiration for Emily. They saw her as a beacon of hope, a woman who refused to bow to power, who dared to expose the truth even when it seemed like an impossible fight. They had waited for someone like her to stand up, to speak out against the abuses they had long endured. "She's a hero," one woman whispered, her voice full of emotion. "She did what we couldn't. She's given us justice." "A man," said, his voice thick with gratitude, "will never forget what she's done for us." Emily stood firm, unwavering in the face of Kane's defiance. She could feel the weight of their words, the collective support of the people who had waited far too long for justice. She wasn't just making a decision in this courtroom, she was helping them find their voice. She was shining a light on the truth they had been forced to hide in the shadows for so long. In this moment, Emily knew that the road to justice wasn't an easy one, but she also knew that it was the right one. The truth, once revealed, was a force that no man, no matter how powerful, could escape. Kane would have to face the consequences of his actions, no matter how much he fought it, and Emily would be the one to ensure he did. She had stood for what was right, and she wouldn't back down, not now, not ever. The room was filled with the undeniable weight of truth, a force that could never be silenced. After hearing the powerful testimonies and reviewing the overwhelming evidence, Emily rose from her chair. Her movements were deliberate, her posture unwavering. The courtroom fell into an expectant silence as her voice rang out, sharp and resolute, cutting through the tension that had gripped the room. "Your Honor," she began, the weight of her words filling the space. "After considering all the evidence and testimony presented, I find that Defendant Kane has committed serious violations of both the law and professional ethics. His acts of abuse of power and racial discrimination are intolerable in a civilized society." Emily paused for a moment, ensuring every word she spoke resonated with authority. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for every victim Kane had harmed, for every person who had suffered under his unjust rule. She glanced around the courtroom, her eyes briefly meeting those of the victims who had stood up to tell their stories. She could feel their collective strength, their shared hope for justice. "Defendant Kane has abused his authority to oppress and insult the vulnerable," she continued. "He has caused irreparable harm to the victims, especially Judge Emily Carter, and has used his position to intimidate, exploit, and degrade." The room was still, the air thick with anticipation as Emily's words echoed. She knew that today, this moment, would not just define Kane's future, it would serve as a reminder to everyone in that courtroom, to society at large, that no one is above the law. "I must emphasize that justice is not revenge," she said, her voice steady and clear, her eyes fixed on Kane. "Justice is restoration. It is the act of uncovering the truth and delivering a fair verdict." Her words seemed to hang in the air as she turned back to the defendant, her gaze piercing. She had worked hard, fought tirelessly, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been hurt by Kane's actions. She had no need for revenge. What she sought was the restoration of balance, the restoration of integrity to the system he had so carelessly corrupted. "However," she continued, her tone hardening, "in this case, the defendant's actions are too severe to ignore. His disregard for the law and the dignity of others cannot go unpunished. Therefore, I have decided to issue the following sentence." The courtroom held its breath, waiting. The finality of Emily's words would echo through the lives of everyone present. She took a breath, locking eyes with Kane, making sure he understood the weight of what was about to happen. "Defendant Kane, you are hereby sentenced to 5 years in prison for the crimes of abuse of power and racial discrimination. You are also stripped of all rights and positions within the police force. You will no longer serve as a symbol of authority, but as an example of what happens when that authority is abused." She paused, the silence almost deafening. Her gaze softened slightly, but her voice remained firm as she continued. "Furthermore," she said, "you are to pay restitution to the victims, including Judge Emily Carter, in the amount of $1 million. The finality of the sentence echoed through the room. The weight of the decision, of the years of suffering Kane had caused, now rested on the shoulders of the law. There was no going back. There was no escaping the truth that had been exposed. Emily looked down at the gavel poised in her hand, ready to bring the trial to a close. "I hope this sentence will serve as a lesson," she said, her voice clear and deliberate, "not just to you, Mr. Kane, but to all others who believe they can misuse their power with impunity. I trust this will encourage you to reflect on your actions and perhaps change your behavior moving forward." As Emily delivered her final words, The sense of justice filled the room. Kane sat frozen, his gaze now downcast. His arrogance, the same arrogance that had once seemed so unshakable, was gone. He knew, everyone knew, that the consequences of his actions were now inevitable. The courtroom erupted into applause, the sound of people standing for what was right, for the justice they had so longed for. Their voices mixed with a heavy feeling of relief and triumph. Emily allowed herself a brief moment of peace as she watched the applause unfold. Justice had been served. As she sat back in her chair, the weight of the gavel in her hand seemed to lift a weight from her shoulders. Emily felt a deep sense of relief and peace wash over her. It was over, and she had done what was right. She had used her power not just for her own sake, but for every person who had suffered under Kane's reign of abuse. The balance had been restored, and in that moment, Emily felt the weight of her role as a judge fulfilled. This wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for every person who believed that justice still existed, even in the darkest corners. And as the room settled, as the claps slowly died down, Emily knew this was just the beginning. The law had been upheld, but the fight for justice continued. The truth had prevailed today, and as long as she had the power to do so, Emily would ensure that it would continue to prevail. Kane's trial wasn't just a case. It became a powerful lesson for society. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that no one is above the law and every wrongdoing must be paid for. This trial served as a warning to those who believe that power, status, or protection could shield them from the consequences of their actions. The trial demonstrated that no matter how much influence one might have, no matter who might stand in your corner, the law is unyielding. If you break it, you must face the consequences. Kane, once untouchable, had learned that lesson the hard way, and his fate was sealed. It also revealed a fundamental truth. The truth will always prevail. No matter how much you try to hide it, how deeply you bury it beneath layers of lies and corruption, it will come to light. The truth has a way of cutting through the darkness, no matter how hard the darkness tries to push it down. In the end, the truth exposed Kane's many sins, and he could not escape it. But this trial was not only a lesson about justice. It was a lesson in courage and perseverance. It showed that even when you are oppressed, when you've been humiliated and abused, you must never give up hope. Emily had stood firm in the face of overwhelming odds, refusing to be silenced by the man who had tried to crush her. Her courage inspired everyone watching, reminding them that no matter how daunting the battle may seem, standing up for what is right is always worth it. It also inspired those who had been victims of injustice. They were no longer alone. They saw that they too could find support from a community that cared about justice. The trial gave them the courage to believe that change was possible, that their voices mattered, and that the law could be a tool for transformation. This trial proved that justice still exists, even when it seems out of reach. No matter how much darkness surrounds us, the light of justice can always find a way to shine through, to guide the way. It was a victory not just for Emily, but for every person who had suffered at the hands of a corrupt system. After the trial, those who had witnessed the proceedings felt a deep, profound shift within themselves. The anger and the pain they had carried for so long began to morph into a sense of responsibility. They understood, perhaps for the first time, that the fight against injustice is a continuous one, and even the smallest act of defiance can create ripples of change. They realized that silence is complicity. They couldn't stand by when they saw wrongdoing. They had to speak up, take action. It was no longer enough to simply observe. If they were to live in a society of true justice, they had to stand for it, defend it, and make sure that no one was allowed to abuse their power again. Kane's trial ignited a wave of change in society. It stirred a collective awareness, reminding people of their civic duty. It encouraged others to rise up and defend what was right, to protect justice no matter the cost. The courtroom had been a battleground, but it was also a place of empowerment, an arena where truth had triumphed and where society had come together to restore balance. And above all, the trial brought hope to those who had long been searching for justice. It showed them that no matter how difficult the road ahead might seem, they should never abandon their fight. The light of justice, no matter how faint at times, could always be rekindled. They just had to keep pushing forward, no matter the obstacles. The trial didn't just end with the sentencing of Kane. It sparked a movement, one that would continue long after the gavel fell. People were awakened to the power they had, the power to stand for justice, to call out wrongs, and to create a world where truth and fairness were the guiding principles. It was a reminder that the fight for justice is never over, but it is always worth it. After the intense and nerve-wracking trial, Emily felt a deep sense of relief flood through her, easing the tension in her chest. The relentless storm of anxiety and doubt that had tormented her for so long began to subside, leaving behind a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The weight of everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the sleepless nights, had finally lifted, and she could breathe again. She knew that she had done the right thing. She had faced the monster who had tried to crush her and emerged victorious. She had stood up for justice, for truth, and in the end, she had won. The thought of that gave her a quiet sense of triumph, knowing she hadn't let her fears control her. Her life slowly began to return to something resembling normalcy, but it was a different kind of normal. The life she had known before the trial, the life of doubt and hesitation, was gone, replaced with something stronger, something more confident. She had been tested in ways she never expected, and now the fear that once gripped her had vanished. When Emily walked into the courtroom, she no longer saw the powerful figures who had once intimidated her. Instead, she saw them for what they were, men and women who, like everyone else, were subject to the law. Her heart no longer raced in the presence of power. Her pulse was steady, calm, as she made decisions based on fairness and truth. She didn't just continue her work as a judge, she transformed it. Each ruling she made was now infused with a deeper sense of empathy and humanity. Emily knew the pain of injustice all too well, and she was determined to ensure that no one in her courtroom would experience what she had. She approached every case with a commitment to fairness, ensuring that the voices of those who had been silenced were heard. Her decisions were always thoughtful, always weighed carefully, but they were never clouded by fear. She wasn't just delivering judgments, she was delivering hope, giving people a fair shot at a life unburdened by the weight of unfairness. But Emily's work didn't stop there. She knew that true justice wasn't just about what happened within the walls of a courtroom. It was about making change, creating a society where every person had the opportunity to live without fear, without being oppressed by the very system that was meant to protect them. Emily became an active participant in numerous community-based initiatives, joining forces with organizations that focused on civil rights, equal treatment, and fighting systemic corruption. She worked tirelessly to help those who had been wronged, those who had no voice in the face of injustice. Emily's role expanded beyond the courtroom. She worked with organizations that helped protect vulnerable communities from racial profiling, police brutality, and discriminatory practices. She didn't just write laws, she advocated for them. She volunteered with legal aid services to assist those who couldn't afford representation, determined to level the playing field and provide a platform for those who had been ignored. She also became an outspoken advocate for education, believing that the key to breaking down barriers was in knowledge. She spoke at schools, community centers, and public forums, helping people understand their rights and encouraging them to fight for what was rightfully theirs. It was Emily's belief that the law wasn't just something for lawyers and judges. It was something for every citizen to understand, to wield, and to protect. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Emily became a hero to many. People looked up to her, not just for her legal expertise, but for her courage and unyielding commitment to fairness. She had fought for justice when the entire system seemed stacked against her, and her victory became a beacon of hope for others. She was a symbol of what could be achieved when one person stood up against an unjust system, and she inspired countless others to do the same. Emily also became a source of strength for those who had suffered similar abuses, for those who had been victimized by the very people sworn to protect them. Emily was proof that they too could have their day in court. She became an advocate not just for legal reform but for social reform. She used her position to push for changes in policy, to ensure that the systems of power didn't continue to abuse the people they were supposed to serve. She worked closely with civil rights organizations, fighting to bring attention to the systemic racism, corruption, and inequality that pervaded not only the legal system but society at large. Even with all her success and newfound purpose, Emily never forgot what had happened to her. The memory of Cain's bloodstained hands was forever etched in her mind, serving as a constant reminder of the battles still to be fought. It was a reminder that injustice didn't disappear just because one person stood up. It was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for someone else to fall victim to its cruelty. And Emily would not allow that to happen. She worked harder, pushing herself beyond her limits to make sure that no one else would suffer the way she had. She couldn't erase the past, but she could work to prevent history from repeating itself. Through her work, she also made sure to honor those who had supported her during the trial. She couldn't have done it alone. She was profoundly grateful for the legal community that had rallied behind her, for the civil rights groups that had been with her every step of the way. She had been lifted up by their strength, and she never forgot it. She also made sure to show her appreciation to the victims who had stood alongside her in the courtroom, those who had been brave enough to speak out, to share their stories. Their voices had made all the difference, and she carried them with her every day. The trial had changed Emily, but in ways she hadn't expected. She had become stronger, more confident, and more compassionate. The woman who had walked into that courtroom uncertain and broken had emerged as a true advocate for change. She realized that while her journey had been long and fraught with challenges, she was exactly where she needed to be. She had discovered that her strength lay not in her ability to make judgments, but in her ability to make a difference. And with that knowledge, she knew she could change the world. She had become a living testament to the power of standing up for what's right, to the idea that justice could still be achieved no matter the circumstances. Emily had fought for her own justice, and in doing so, she had become a warrior for justice everywhere. She had discovered her true power, not just in the courtroom, but in the hearts and minds of the people she had inspired. And now she had a purpose far greater than herself, to continue the fight for those who still needed a voice, to continue bringing justice to a world that so often forgot it. The story of Emily and Kane's trial spread quickly, not only within the city but across the entire country. Her story became a beacon of hope and strength, inspiring countless individuals, especially those who had been victims of injustice. It resonated deeply with those who had been silenced for so long, offering them a glimmer of possibility in a world that often seemed indifferent to their suffering. For the first time, many of these people felt they were no longer alone. They saw Emily's fight and realized that they too could find support from their community, from those who believed in justice, and from those who were willing to stand beside them. Emily had shown them that they could stand up, demand what was rightfully theirs, and face the forces of oppression without fear. She had taken a stand, and now they knew they could too. The voices that had once been quiet, drowned out by the weight of fear and injustice, began to rise. People who had suffered in silence for years started to speak out. They shared their stories, their pain, and the burdens they had carried alone for so long. No longer were they afraid to confront the past. The darkness that had once kept them muted was now being shattered by their courage and the power of their shared experiences. These stories ignited a wave of support for civil rights organizations. More and more people rallied behind the cause, eager to help, to bring change. People joined community organizations, volunteered for social justice initiatives, and worked tirelessly to support those who had nowhere else to turn. The collective energy of those who had once been too afraid to act now united to build a more just and fair society, a society where no one would be left behind, where no one would have to endure the cruelty of unchecked power. Emily, once an ordinary woman, had become a symbol of hope. She was now a heroine in the fight against injustice. She inspired not only those who had been victims of abuse, but especially women, minorities, and anyone who had been marginalized or oppressed. She had shown them that they could break free from their chains, that their voices could be heard, and their struggles could lead to meaningful change. Her journey proved a fundamental truth. No matter who you are, no matter where you come from, you can make a difference. Emily had proven that no matter the odds, one person could change the world. She had changed her own life, and in doing so, she had sparked a movement that would continue long after her victory in the courtroom. Her actions inspired others to take the courage to stand up, to speak out, and to demand justice. Emily's story became a powerful message that justice could indeed be served and that society could change. It echoed the message that no matter how difficult the battle may be, no matter how deep the scars may run, change is possible. It is within our reach if we have the courage to pursue it, to persist despite the odds, and to work together for the common good. The future, once uncertain, now seemed full of promise, brightened by the light of those who dared to fight for what was right. And as the ripple effects of her fight spread throughout the nation, Emily's message became clearer than ever. We can change the world. All it takes is one person to stand up, one person to fight for justice, and the courage of many to stand with them. Together, we can create a future where equality and fairness reign. The future was now something worth believing in, and Emily had proven that with enough courage and persistence, the change we long for is not just a distant dream. It is a reality waiting to be built. Thank you for following the emotional journey of Judge Emily Carter and her quest for justice. We hope that this story has given you moments of reflection, contemplation, and inspiration. Emily's story is a reminder that justice is not something distant or unattainable. It's something we can achieve if we have enough courage and perseverance. We also hope that this story has inspired you to stand up against injustice, no matter how small it may seem. If you enjoyed the story, please hit the like button and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss out on other exciting videos. We have many more fascinating stories waiting for you. Let's explore and share the beautiful values in life together. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you soon.